Hi, this is Senator Malcolm Roberts for the weekly wrap, and I'm here in Brisbane, and I'm going to be discussing a few points that have happened in the last week or so, and that will happen in the next day or so as well, and then turn it over to questions as usual. So last night I had the honour and the privilege of addressing the Ayn Rand Society in Brisbane. And Ayn Rand was a fabulous author. She was instrumental, two of her works were instrumental in guiding my thinking for life. And those two books that I read were The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. The Fountainhead I read somewhere in the Hunter Valley or central Queensland. I can't remember where I was working at one of the mines as a coal miner at the underground coalface. Atlas Shrugged, I'm pretty sure I read that on the ferry, the big ferry coming down the Canadian Inland Passage from Alaska down to southern Canada. And I remember the magnificent scenery and the wildlife, the whales, the bald eagles. But this book stunned me, and it was all about personal enterprise and people making decisions and taking responsibility for making decisions. So as we discussed things, I gave my address, and then in question and answer afterwards, and by the way, Tal, I can't pronounce his second name, who's heading up the Ayn Rand Institute in America. He's an Israeli. He spoke brilliantly, such a crisp condensation of what Ayn Rand was about. Objectivism, doing things objectively based on facts and reasoning. I loved it. Brought back many memories. In the context of Ayn Rand's life, at the time she wrote the books, humans were generally, overwhelmingly, thought to be worthy, noble, and admired. We have many skills, and we care, and we're admired. But after generations of anti-human campaigns, as I said last night, humans are now being portrayed as evil, uncaring, rapacious, greedy, unkind. People have been using that in government to try and con people into dependence on government. They're basically saying, you, us, we can't be trusted because we're greedy, rapacious, uncaring, unkind, and evil, inherently an evil. And so what the government says is, let us take care of you. Let us make sure that people don't hurt you, harm you, violate you. And so when you stop and think about it, government is made up of people. So in effect, sure, we've got our Hitlers, our Stalins, our Morrisons, our Hunts, we've got our Mao Zedongs, our Maurice Strongs from the UN. We've got all these people, and they have done some incredibly evil things, been responsible for the killing of millions of people. In the case of Morrison, leading to the deaths of tens of thousands of people needlessly. But the others have been in tens of millions of deaths. And so, sure, they exist, but the majority of people are wonderful, caring. You know, I think I've discussed it before, maybe not on live stream, but the fact that you and I are talking now, the fact that I'm sitting here means that someone cared for me. Because if we compare ourselves with the other animals in the animal kingdom, for example, a horse, a foal is born, pops out, bounces on the ground. After a few minutes, it staggers to its feet. And within half an hour, it's cantering. It's free to join the herd and keep moving with the herd in its natural form. Humans, completely helpless, can't even move ourselves, can't even control our movements of our hands and legs when we're first born. We don't start to walk, and even then you can barely call it a walk, until about 12 months. We don't start to talk and communicate until about 2 years, and even then it's hardly communication. But, you know, for the first 10 years, we're extremely vulnerable. So the fact that I'm here means that someone cared for me. It doesn't mean that my parents were wonderful or my parents were bad, but it means that they cared for me and they did the best they could. And same with everyone, anyone listening to this, watching this, someone cared for you. Otherwise, you wouldn't be watching it. You wouldn't be here. So that's very important to understand. I then quoted from the Australian Constitution, and then I read this from the American Declaration of Independence. I have a lot of a lot of time for Americans. I've spent a lot of time. I've been through all 50 states of America and all but one Canadian province. Couldn't find the bridge to Newfoundland. But the American Declaration of Independence stunned me, and it was declared on the 4th of July, 1776. This is what it says in part. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. They're unalienable. You can't strip them of their rights. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. When I say you can't strip them of their rights, they always have those rights. They're permanent. They're irrevocable. They are there. So if a government does prevent you accessing those rights, they're still there. It's just the government stopping you. Then it goes on to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That's extremely important to understand, the American Declaration of Independence. Governments derive their powers from the consent of the government, only with the consent of the governed. Deriving their powers from the consent of the governed. So the people who are governed hand that power, that consent, to the government. And then it says that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, the government, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So governments are there, according to the American Declaration of Independence, to protect rights, not strangle them, not give them. Governments cannot give rights. The rights are inalienable. They're given. They're universal. And the government is charged with affecting safety and happiness. So I'll just skip through some of the points that I discussed last night. And I want to thank the people who were there, and thank you for your very positive comments. It was a pleasure. It really was. And then to have dinner afterwards in the Paddo pub with people and continue the chat. Ayn Rand, this is what I said last night, Ayn Rand considered rights from the perspective that humans as rational animals uniquely use reason to make rational judgments. That's what's unique about humans. We make rational judgments. Sometimes we question some people whether they're capable of it, but that's what humans do in the right circumstances. Using force or threats of force. So it's not just force, it's threats of force, as we've seen in the last 3 years. Using force or threats of force, humans can be forced to make unreasonable decisions. In the face of threats or coercion or physical force, human judgment can be compromised. Humans must always be left to act on our own judgment. In order to exercise individual rights, we need liberty, we need freedom. Only through freedom, choice, can there be responsibility and accountability. And responsibility is essential because it leads to love and inner happiness, leads to basic security in oneself. That responsibility is crucial for free enterprise, for human progress. And I was talking with Billy Takahi in New Zealand. He interviewed me on a podcast yesterday afternoon from New Zealand. He's been standing up very bravely against that despotic, tyrannical government in New Zealand over the COVID mismanagement and deceit. And he served 4 months in jail. He's also now facing another court case, all for just standing up for his rights. And he was saying that, Jesus said that there must be choice. People must have a choice because that's how people develop responsibility. And there can be nothing without responsibility. So when a government opposes, it strips that right to choice. So what's the role of governments, I asked? There are 3 roles. I've all long said this. Protect life, protect property, and protect freedom. Protect life is obvious, yet the Palaszczuk and Morrison governments destroyed lives, many lives, and killed people. Their absurd policies, insane policies during COVID mismanagement. The second one, protect property. Why is that important? Well, when people have property that is protected, they strive for buying property, by working to earn property. And if it's taken away from them, they're not secure, the rights are not secure to that property, then they don't work for it. So you don't get the human progress, and you don't get that sense of responsibility. What's yours is yours, what's mine is mine. I can share it with you, but you can't steal it from me. And of course, the third role of government, in my view, is to protect freedom. Because freedom is the number one thing for human progress. The number one, I've got 8 keys for human progress. The number one is freedom. So government's roles include the protection of people's rights. Government must be based on serving the people. That's what governments are there. Go back to the American Declaration of Independence. Go back to our own Constitution. We sometimes create voluntarily standards and rules to enable a community with minimal restrictions on individuals. For example, go to India and try driving on the roads. You go crazy, and it's very inefficient because people are all over the place, and it's very inefficient because people have to spend their time staying alive. Whereas when we have certain rules, then we reduce the variation and we are much more efficient. And sometimes governments have to put in standards and rules on behalf of the people. Governments should only work on the behalf of the people as a protection from individuals violating another's rights. But the court system, based on common law, as it used to be, rather than statute law, was far more effective than the current system we have. Rights do not come from government. Rights are universal. The government's role is to protect people's rights, including the right to life and liberty. Due to the human condition, and Thomas Jefferson, I read a fair bit about him, he said that people are wonderful, but in government they can go off the rails and be a restriction on society. So governments can inherently kill rights, including liberty, the right to freedom. Rights are not the same as laws, although some rights are restated as laws. Rights are more fundamental than laws and form the foundation of some laws at common law or through statutes. I made a list here. Government should not overreach or act ultra vires, meaning beyond its authority. Who gave the government its authority? The people. Government should be small, in my view, and limited to what is genuinely needed to protect rights and freedoms. And thirdly, government should protect individual liberty. Government should not act to stifle or to limit freedom or liberty. We've seen a lot of that in the last 3 years. I mentioned that there's been a global campaign for many decades now to extinguish liberty. It started in the 1960s with the Club of Rome, that insane organization that said we're going to be bursting at the seams on this planet to contain the numbers of people. The population is going to shoot up to 15 billion people. Well, guess what? They have now revised that down to 8 billion, or 8.6 billion, and then start going down. So we're close to peak population right now. But the 1960s, the Club of Rome started its anti-human campaign, decrying humans as uncaring, greedy, rapacious, irresponsible. And that laid the platform for organizations that had been in place for many decades before: the UN World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, WWF, and others, to take power from countries, to take power from individuals, based on the globalist claim that humans are evil. As I said before, who makes up government? People. So what they're really saying is, you and I are evil, uncaring, but they are the elitists, and they are fine. Sometimes I pointed out that liberty can be stolen without even knowing. Think about, if I hold a gun to your head, people can see I'm controlling you. But if I indoctrinate you through a school curriculum from when you first entered preschool, then you can't see it. It's intangible, it's invisible, it's indirect, it's subtle, it's pervasive. It goes through all aspects of your life. You see it on woke advertising on TV. You see it in corporate slogans pushing this nonsense. You see it in churches these days, sad to say. You see it in advertising. You see it everywhere. It's ubiquitous. So that indoctrination, you can't see that if I was doing the indoctrinating, the child that I'm indoctrinating who becomes an adult doesn't know that he or she is indoctrinated. And then we have arguments for the public good based on false data, which is the way that the Greens operate. They tell a lie about what is happening. They blame a group. They then set up a conflict, a division, us versus them, and then people are sucked into going with the vibe and saying, we've got to support the underdog. And it's just been fabricated. You know, the LNP, for example, the Liberal National Parties, have introduced every major climate and energy policy that is now destroying our country. The Labor Party comes in each time and ramps it up, like the safeguard policy I've mentioned before. That was ramped up by Bowen and Albanese in September of last year, almost 12 months ago. We haven't seen the destruction coming from that yet. We've started to feel it, but it's going to be huge, far worse than anything we've seen so far in terms of electricity prices going up, shooting up, and reliability falling away. But that was started by the Turnbull-Hunt safeguard policy. Same name. And it was pointed out at the time that went through the Senate before I got in there. It was in December 2015. And it just snuck through quietly, no fanfare. But they even pointed out, some commentators, that it would form the basis for a global carbon dioxide tax. So it was the Liberal Nationals that did that enabled Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen to now finish it off. We see anti-social media, Facebook, Meta, Instagram, Twitter. Twitter used to be anti-social. It's not so much these days. But anti-social media, stifling freedom of thought, stifling reach, stifling what you can say. We've seen the UN admit to controlling water, to attempting to control water, and to indirectly actually controlling water in this country, controlling resources, controlling property rights, controlling children, exposing children to needless harm and violence, telling families how they must behave, telling parents how to raise children. And when the parents don't have that choice anymore, or perceive they don't have that choice, you lose that responsibility. And then you have youth crime increasing, which is what we see. Controlling food. We see language being controlled. You know, wind farms sound so cute. They're hideous industrial monstrosities that are destroying the environment. We'll talk more about that, as I promised last week. We'll talk more about that in a future session. So they use the language to dress up some things as beneficial when they're not, and they use the language to dress up some things like fossil fuels. They're not fossil fuels. They're not old-fashioned. They are responsible for, they're hydrocarbons is their true name. Hydrogen, carbon atoms coming together to form hydrocarbons. And because of coal, oil, and natural gas, we now have 30% more timber in forests in the developed continents than we did have 100 years ago. Whales wouldn't be around if we'd continued using them for lighting. If we continued using forests for getting wood to burn for heating and for cooking, they wouldn't be around. Then we use labels. And of course, the people who are pushing this nonsense, they use labels such as progressive for themselves when they're actually regressive. Then they use labels to smear others, calling them conspiracy theorists or nut jobs or climate deniers, whatever else they want to call. So we've got to understand that, because it's very important to understand that freedom for humans does not mean, as I said last night, it does not mean trampling our natural environment. Humans and the natural environment are mutually dependent. We depend on each other. If we kill the environment, the natural environment, human civilization ends. If we kill human civilization, which is what the Greens and the United Nations and the World Economic Forum and the Labor Party and the LNP policies are doing, if we kill human civilization, human progress, then we destroy the natural environment. That's part of a longer conversation, but it's quite clear that the number one saviors of the environment in the last 170 years since the start of the Industrial Revolution have been coal, oil, and natural gas, without a doubt, and uranium. Add that to nuclear power and hydropower. So humans must have the natural environment for our own health and our well-being, mental health and physical health, and the natural environment must have humans developing and human civilization continuing to develop. So farmers, for example, have been demonized as a group to hate, to isolate, as being evil. Farmers are the best carers of the land. Their land is the natural superannuation policy they have, because when they finish farming, they either pass their farm on to their children, so they want it to be in good shape, or they sell it and retire to another place to live for their retirement, so they need it in good shape. Any farmer that destroys his or her land is destroying their own future and their children's future. So that's why farms, established farmers, experienced farmers, are the best protectors of the land, best protectors of the environment, because they know they have to work in balance, in sync with the environment. So it's the deprivation of liberty that's actually hurting environments and farmers. So I finished last night by saying that they weren't, I spoke a lot more than that, but we each have a duty for the human good. We each have a duty for the human good. Our duty is to preserve, expand, and entrench life and liberty within each of us and within our communities, our local, state, national, and global communities. Yes, global communities. So we're part of the human race, which makes us part of the global community, but not the global elitist predators community. They can have that. So that was fun last night, and the questions afterwards were very very informative. Tonight, Christine and I are going to watch Sounds of Freedom. One Nation got the rights to this film, not exclusive rights, but the rights to host to show it in a theatre. Our headquarters booked it, and I want to compliment the people in headquarters for doing that. It was a marvellous initiative. Sounds of Freedom was to be shown in a I can't remember the initial theatre, but it was sold out within hours. So they had to scramble to get a bigger venue, a bigger theatre. That was sold out within a day or two. So they then scrambled to get another bigger venue, and that's on tonight. It's on at the port side. Let me see here. It's sold out, so you can't go to it anyway. But watch the film in the future for other locations. It'll be around. I think it starts around about the 18th, so it's already probably open in some places. Then tomorrow, Christine and I are going to the Children's Health Defence inaugural conference. I think it's the first conference, the Australian chapter of the Children's Health Defence, which was formed by Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in the United States. They're holding their conference at the Well Function Centre, 58 Highland Way, Upper Coomera. Now, it may be booked out, I don't know. Excuse me, but get on the internet and find out if you want. I'll be on a panel with Greg Beattie and Meryl Dorey, who've got some amazing facts on childhood vaccines. And then tomorrow, so I'm on the first panel there with Greg and Meryl. They'll be replicating my podcast that I did with them a few months ago. We'll be doing it in a quicker form and getting the information out. Greg's written a fabulous book. Now, what's it called? It's out of my reach. Something about foolishness, but I'll leave it. Then I leave there as soon as my panel's finished, and Christine and I are going to the One Nation Freedom of Speech Conference. We've got guest speakers like Alan Jones, who's probably the king of media in this country, the most respected commentator in this country in the media. Diverse experience. He's coached the only Wallabies Grand Slam winning team ever, in winning all four nations tournaments games against all four nations in the United Kingdom, Britain. He's been coach in rugby league. He's been a speechwriter for a prime minister. He's been atop the game in ratings in radio for many years in Australia. Magnificent, and he's very well known as a hard-hitting journalist. He'll be there. David Flint, a renowned lawyer, will be there, a very strong commentator on freedom. And also David Adler, Dr. David Adler, president of the Australian Jewish Association, because the Jews have been belted by removal of their rights over the centuries. We've got two influencers. One is Alexandra Marshall, who's also a journalist in her own right, got a diverse experience, but two social media, if you like, influencers. Another one I think is on TikTok. I've forgotten her name. Harrison, hang on, it's right here. Emma Harrison and Alexandra Marshall. And then we've got other commentators in the middle and panels to be run to draw out questions and answers. Now, I've got a copy of the bill here. Here it is. Just the Misinformation and Disinformation Bill is what we're calling it. We actually call it the Censorship Bill. So I'll tell you what it says is the definition of misinformation and disinformation. For the purposes of this Act, dissemination of content using a digital service, that's digital platform like Google search engines, Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and others on the digital service. It is misinformation if the content contains information that is false, misleading, or deceptive. The content is not excluded content for misinformation purposes. So the government, or the standards and codes, exclude some content from misinformation purposes. Oh, really? And the government is let out of this. So it can continue to distribute misinformation and disinformation. It's not going to be captured by this. It can continue doing it, but you can't if it passes, and I can't. The content is provided on the digital service to one or more end users in Australia, and the provision of the content on the service is reasonably likely to cause or contribute to serious harm. I'll get to harm in a minute. Now, disinformation is defined as the same things, plus it comes with the intent to deceive another person. So misinformation is provision of content that's reasonably likely to cause or contribute to serious harm. Disinformation is when someone does it deliberately. And harm is defined as hatred against a group in Australian society on the basis of ethnicity, nationality, race, gender, sexual orientation, age, religion, or physical or mental disability. Pretty much everything. Disruption of public order or disruption of the society in Australia, that's fair enough. Harm to the integrity of Australian democratic processes or of Commonwealth, state, territory, or local government institutions. You can see what's going on there. If they don't like the way you're campaigning, they'll have a go at you. Harm to the health of Australians, fair enough. But some people think Big Pharma is very harmful. Some people think naturopaths are giving harmful advice. I think for responsibility, the choice needs to be left with the person who's using the services. Harm to the Australian environment. See, there's nothing to show anywhere that anything in the climate has changed. But what the government will say is, if you go against the climate fraud, then you will be harming the environment. See what they're doing? Or economic or financial harm to Australians, the Australian economy, or a sector of the Australian economy. So hatred against a group, disruption of public order, harm to the integrity of Australian democratic processes, harm to the health of Australians, harm to the Australian government and the Australian environment, economic or financial harm. But remember, the Australian government is left out of this. The government can do whatever it wants. So some pretty significant questions. Who the hell determines truth? It does not say in this bill who determines truth. What they're wanting to do is set up powers. When this is introduced, they're wanting to set up powers that enable the government to go and get information off Facebook and other platforms, including Google search engines and other search engines, and other forms of internet communication. They're wanting to say to the platforms, social media platforms, you will have provisions in a code that covers disinformation and misinformation. And if the government thinks that it's not adequate code, or it's not, the code is not adequate, then it will make standards as regulations that don't have to go through Parliament. It will make standards and rules in lieu of that code, and it will then expect the platforms to enforce them. So what you can see is Meta, Facebook, Instagram, Google is going to be saying, don't blame us for censoring you, blame the government. And the government is going to be saying, don't blame us for censoring you, blame Facebook and Instagram, etc. So that's what's going on. There's no definition as to what it makes up truth. And we've had so many letters from people saying, please oppose this. We are opposing it. There's no problem about that. And it's just insidious. And the Liberal Nationals have come out opposing it too. But they're the ones who introduced a similar bill into the previous government under Morrison. They introduced it into Parliament, but they didn't actually debate it and didn't pass it. So they introduced this concept, and now they're opposing it. See what I mean? Politics in this country between Labor and Liberal is a two-party game, and they're playing it all the time, blaming each other. Speaking of false information and misinformation and disinformation, there are several things that I want to raise about the voice referendum, just briefly, because one of them I haven't gone into in depth. But I'll read out a post here. It's complete rubbish. The referendum legislation said there's only one question, and that is, do you approve of this proposed alteration to the Constitution to set up a voice? That's it. That's the question, the only question. And now we've got some rubbish on the internet coming around saying they have two questions. Oh, really? Read the legislation, there's only one. So if you tick yes, this is what it says. If you tick yes to the question of, do you recognise the Indigenous people? This tick will override your no vote for the other question. Tick no to both questions. Do not tick anything. Just write no. Just write no. There's nothing simpler than writing no. Do not tick anything. This is a con. This is a lie. It's a misrepresentation of what's going on. Now, I'll explain why you should not tick anything. Because we've now got, according to Ben Fordham interview, and Alexandra Marshall made a post of this as well, the journalist on Sky News, that Tom Rogers, the head of the Australian Electoral Commission, who's on $600,000 a year, made the surprise admission in an attempt to clarify the voting process on Sky News. What he's saying is that if you want to vote yes, you can write yes, or you can write a tick. A tick is acceptable and means yes, according to him. But if you want to vote no, you must put a no in there. A cross cannot be used. A cross will be informal. It won't be counted. That's why I'm saying don't put a tick to this. So there are some very decent people running around the countryside spreading the other internet myth that there are two questions. They're not. There's only going to be one question. And the answer in my book is no. N-O. That's all you need to write. If you want to write yes and you don't understand it and you want to write yes, that's your choice. Please don't write yes. But the Australian Electoral Commission head has said that you can write yes or you can tick, and that will be counted as a vote in support of the referendum choice, or you can write no, but don't put a cross. So I think that's wrong. I won't say any more on that at the moment. Other people have come out and gone into depth. I've asked a lawyer to have a look at that and tell me what he thinks, because there's also custom there. But as I said, there is only one question on the referendum ballot paper. One question. That's in law, that there's only one question. And please vote no. So with that, I've gone 36 minutes. I meant to be shorter, but I'll now hand over to questions. Q&A. Hunter Valley Miners Advocacy. Is your campaign, Sam Stevens? Good on you, Sam. I love the work you're doing, mate, and you're doing it all voluntarily. Is your campaign against the illegal casualisation of the black coal mining industry still being advanced? Oh, yes, for sure it is being advanced. We're pulling together some facts. I've been extremely busy this week on several other things. Next week I'll have three things. I'll have the COVID inquiry into the bill, or not the actual inquiry, but preparing for the inquiry, making suggestions for the inquiry, which I'll get to in a minute. Must write that down. The Hunter Valley, I want to pull that all together there, because that is affecting miners in central Queensland as well as the Hunter. As you know, Sam, I want to write a letter to Minister Burke, pushing the black coal mining industry case, as you say, still advancing that. We're definitely committed to that. I've got to help protect some people up at Ravenshoe in North Queensland, some people at the back of Ingham in North Queensland, because of wind turbine being set up and destroying the environment, destroying the human habitat. and also doing some planning for holding politicians accountable on the climate fraud. There's something else in my mind too. Preparing our own inquiry, possibly into COVID. Another, because it's more advanced now, we've got a lot more data out, and we want to give a platform to experts around the world so that they can share their details. But we are definitely well and truly on board with the Hunter Valley and Central Queensland and to protect miners' rights and to restore the basic provisions and rights, entitlements, rates of pay that the award currently provides for miners, and that the CFMEU and the Hunter Valley has worked in cahoots with some labour hire companies to strip those entitlements and pay far below the award. We've now had 2 confirmations of that. We've now got a very cold case of people on casual rates losing their entitlements. We've known that for a couple of years. I've been pushing that despite people lying against me. But the second thing is we have now got concrete proof that the rates of pay under some casual coal mining enterprise agreements are below the award. Below the award. That's illegal. And these people on those rates of pay have been denied justice for 9 years. 9 years. That's when it first started happening. So yes, we're going to continue to advance that. Sam? Emilio, what is the plan for New South Wales after Latham's sacking, and what is One Nation's position on what he should have done differently in the last election? Well, that's for a matter for the now the National Executive and the new New South Wales Executive. The plan is that the New South Wales Executive, under the guidance of the National Executive, will conduct an inquiry into what went wrong in the last election in New South Wales. There were many things that went wrong, but I'm not going to preempt them. So I'm going to leave that honestly to the inquiry to come up with, and we'll share them when the inquiry finishes its job. And then once the New South Wales branch can show itself to be acting collaboratively again, because it wasn't collaborative, then the National Executive of One Nation will turn it back over to the New South Wales Executive and let them run it again. There are many things that should have been done differently, but I won't preempt the inquiry. I'll just let that come out. So Pauline's been totally open and transparent with this. She's been on Sky News, did a fabulous interview, some of my staff said, who watched it. Amazing interview, amazing woman. Angelique, yes, you bring a smile to my face. A big fat no to The Voice. Absolutely. I agree with you. It's going to be very bad if it gets in for the Aboriginal people, especially the Aboriginal people, because it'll give another successor to ATSIC, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Commission, that was corrupt and incompetent and restricting Aboriginals. It'll give them absolutely no accountability if The Voice gets in, because they'll be beyond a reproach, because they won't even be able to be cut out by changing the law, because it'll be in the Constitution. Big fat no. Biggles, the government now wants 16-year-olds to vote because they know the system has indoctrinated them into voting for climate shutdown. Correct. 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds even, haven't had much experience. They should not have the responsibility of determining the future of our country. They're also 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds are highly emotionally charged at times. Not everyone, and then they are swayed easily by emotional campaigns. And as you point out, they have been indoctrinated. But quite frankly, Biggles, we've got people who are 25 years of age now who have been indoctrinated. And after COVID, thankfully, they're waking up to that fact. But indoctrination has been going on in many, many ways. I know some people in their 60s who've been indoctrinated. So, yes, but you're right. They want to vote for their rubbish policies based on vibes, like The Voice, like climate fear, COVID fear, lockdowns. Yes, bring it all on. PJS, big pharma seem to think they have the answers to health, but when they are asked simple questions by you, they try and dodge answering it. Yes, it was remarkable, the inquiry we had into Pauline's bill that I introduced, the bill that would outlaw, if passed in Parliament, would outlaw discrimination against people based on vaccine status. We also had 3 Liberal senators introduce a bill doing the same thing, but going through the Fair Work Act and amending it. And we had Pfizer in that inquiry. It was the Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport Committee inquiry into both bills. And I remember the first senator to question them was Senator Matt Canavan from Queensland. And by the way, of the 5 senators who were doing the work in questioning them, 4 of us were from Queensland. There was Matt, Jared, myself, and of course Pauline. And Pauline was next to me, and next to her was Matt. And when Matt asked questions about, does Pfizer support or vindicate the comments of Alfred Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, who said that the vaccines are safe and effective? Are they effective in stopping transmission? And Pfizer wouldn't answer the question. It just dodged the question. So Matt asked a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time. And he was flabbergasted. He just didn't know what to do. And who would in that position? And at the end of his 5 minutes, he got nothing out of them, but he got an amazing thing out of them. Because he looked at me and said, that was a complete waste of time. And I said, no, it wasn't, mate. You weren't watching, but we were watching, just like people at home will be watching. And they can see Pfizer dodging. They can see that Pfizer won't even support their company president who claimed that the vaccines, the injections, were effective. That's amazing, that they won't even stand up and justify that. Now, some of the other things that came out in that inquiry, Senator Hanson, next to me, Pauline, she asked the questions about, asking Pfizer executives, do you support the forcing of people to be injected, and did you have anything to do with that? Pfizer said, people weren't forced. People weren't forced. And then she put it to them, so you're telling me that someone who has a choice about either getting the vaccine or losing his job and therefore losing his ability to feed his children, that's not forcing? And they said, no. They said, I mean, you had to be there to see the fun, the humor in it. It was despicable. It was absolutely despicable. And then Alex Antic asked a question about genetics, because was the Office of the Gene Therapy, I can't remember the regulator's name, involved. And of course they weren't adequately involved at all. And Senator Rennick, Jared asked his questions of Pfizer and then of Moderna. They couldn't answer how myocarditis and pericarditis occur in the human body. They couldn't answer that, and they had no clue what he was talking about. The TGA fortunately did. So they don't even understand one of the main side effects, adverse events that occur from their own product. And I talked about, I asked questions about collusion with the government on many issues, and I got out of them the fact they admitted it, that they brought in a special batch of vaccines, injections, for their own Pfizer employees in this country. So who knows what they gave their own employees. But I asked them questions about did they collude with the government on mandates? Did they collude with government departments on mandates? Did they collude with governments on stripping ivermectin, safe, effective, affordable, accessible treatment for COVID that has been proven to work completely effectively everywhere in the world with very few, if any, side effects? And it's had 4 decades, 40 years, been given out in doses of 4 billion doses almost, and no side effects of serious consequence at all. A wonder drug. In fact, it won a Nobel Prize for its inventors, and it has been listed by the UN World Health Organization as one of the top 100 drugs of all time. So they dodged my questions. And one of the things I noticed, the way they dodged the question, is they would say, well, the experts around the world have vindicated us. Therapeutic Goods Administration, for example. The experts, they say. And I said, one of your bloody experts was Greg Hunt, the former health minister, who was in power when he introduced the COVID injections. And I said, he said, quote, the world is engaged in the largest clinical vaccination trial. It's an experiment. And they couldn't give me any information to say otherwise, but they said no, they disagreed. So they always deferred to experts. They wouldn't come back with their own information. They deferred to experts. Now, those bloody experts, the TGA admitted to me in Senate estimates that they did not do any testing. They did not even look at the patient-level data from the early trials. They did not even. Instead, they relied upon the Food and Drug Administration in America, the America's regulator on drugs. And why did they do that? Because the FDA has, what did they tell me, 15,000 employees and a budget of $8 billion a year. So they relied on the FDA in America. So did many other countries around the world relied on the FDA. And the FDA had already said, before the TGA admitted that to me, the FDA had already said that it did no testing of its own. It didn't even consider the Pfizer data. It relied on a report from Pfizer. And then independent scrutineers went into Pfizer's data in depth. Qualified scientists, medical scientists, qualified medical people went into the data from Pfizer and found horrific levels of vaccine harm and deaths from these shots. And so the TGA did not test, did not even assess the patient-level data. Moderna, we were only briefly with Moderna because Pfizer had given us plenty. But they relied upon some dodgy information from the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, because the Australian Bureau of Statistics is not comparing apples with apples. It's made it's misrepresented. It's misinformed people over the use of its data in order to downplay the number of deaths. And then we had the TGA, and we had some fun with them. And they admitted that while data on longer-term efficacy and safety are still being gathered, so they had no clue about the long-term effects of these injections on people, and when they approved it provisionally. And now, without further testing, they have approved it. And I asked them why doctors who are legally authorized to declare, to write and sign on a death certificate the cause of deaths, why, and we know that many doctors were suppressed from actually blaming vaccines for deaths because they were intimidated by the Australian Health Prudential Regulatory Agency. Excuse me. So they would not. So we know the number of reported deaths is far less than the actual number of deaths, but they did not have a process that's objective and got hard guidelines, and they have received 960,000 deaths, reported deaths from doctors who are legally entitled and have the responsibility for describing the cause of death, and they have whittled it down to 14, just 14. We know that at least 2 children died from the COVID injections, and they have said none have died. So, I mean, this is what we're relying upon at the moment. It's just completely false. Susan, watching from Brizzy, thank you. Lovely to see you. Like the flowers. Is that flowers or lights? Thank you for watching. Dennis asks, have you read what Josephine Cashman has to say about The Voice? I don't know what you're talking about in terms of what she has written, which version. I know she's written a lot about it. I haven't read it. I do respect her. She's come out very strongly in the No campaign. So I've got so much to read in this job. But I have a lot of respect for Josephine Cashman. She has said many things that have been accurate. And so I don't know specifically what you mean. So if you want to put that up there, we'll have another look at it. Kimmy, word is another pandemic is coming in September. Do you know anything about this? No, I don't. I've read stories like that on the internet when I get in and out pretty quickly of the internet. We've heard stories about something like that from Florida and I think somewhere else, maybe Canada or Europe. But I've also seen a post, which I'll be reposting soon, saying, never again. So people are awake this time. So we're going to have to be on our game and on our guard there. Any more questions? Could you bring up why we vote in pencil in the voting booths. Yes, in fact, that's something I didn't mention earlier on. We had Mr. Tom Rogers up here. He's the commissioner of the Australian Electoral Commission. We've given him a pretty rough time in Senate estimates. We have asked reasonable questions, but he wasn't initially used to getting asked questions about the things we asked questions about, and he was a bit prickly about it. Because of that, we were very wary. We've got one person in our office in particular who's right on this like a dog with a bone, and he's been all over the issues. He was the one who developed our first bill that we put into the Senate that led to the first audit of a federal election, the first ever audit. That's what we introduced into the Parliament. And so he decided he might try to understand us a bit better and see what our concerns were. So he came up to our office a few months ago. We had a very good visit, and then he gave us a briefing in Canberra. I wasn't able to attend because the Senate was locked up in the divisions, but my staff went. They were very, very pleased, including the person in my office who has the most suspicion of the Australian Electoral Commission. And we're acting not just, Johnny, not just on our own issues, but on issues that citizens have raised with us and brought to us, and we've been putting them forward too. Cut a long story short, that briefing in Canberra was very effective, put a lot of our issues to bed, and we realised that some of the issues that we had were due to misunderstandings by the Australian Electoral Commission. They weren't hiding things at all. This time, they've realised now the only way to deal with us is straight up and down the line, and they came to us with some samples of materials from elections, for example, seals, and I've got my son now having a look to see if he can bust into the seals. I don't think he can. He's pretty bright, and he's also pretty has a lot of initiative and a lot of cunning about him mechanically. So we'll see if he can break into them. I doubt it, but they came armed with some materials from the voting process, which were reassuring, and they put almost all of our issues to bed. The only thing now, they've reassured us in just about everything. And they now have a spirit of cooperation because they understand what we're trying to do is help them do their job. The better they do their job, the more faith people have in the electoral system. That means the more faith they have in the electoral process, the electoral system, the results of an election. So that's why we've been doing it, to either find out and correct errors, which we've done. We've now got an audit in place for every federal election from here on, 6 weeks before the election, to make sure that the systems are correct in accordance with the law, and 6 weeks and some weeks after the election is finished, an audit of the processes to make sure that the processes were actually complying in the way they were used. So we'll have that in future, and the next audit will be better, and each audit will improve, I'm sure, as people get experience with doing audits. And they also have audits, by the way, from the Australian and AO. So why are pencils used? We asked him that question. We've known it for some time. Pencils are far cheaper than pens. Secondly, in humid areas, pens sometimes don't work. If a pen breaks, it's hard to get another one quickly. Sufficient to keep on hand. You only need a little bit of pencil to do the job. Pencils are cheap. That's why they're used. And in humid areas, they're more effective than a pen quite often. But they said so. They said this quite voluntarily. They said if people want to vote with a pen, you can vote with a pen. Just bring your own pen. Scott France says, why don't Australians have a Bill of Rights? I think this referendum should have been for a Bill of Rights for all of us. Scott, the Americans have a Bill of Rights, but what that does is it opens up the interpretation of the Bill of Rights, to judges who are human. And so I've talked with Jim Allen briefly about this. He's a professor of law at the University of Queensland, a very strong conservative, very strong constitutional lawyer. I've also talked with the barrister in my own office about this. They're opposed to a Bill of Rights because it codifies things far too closely and leaves interpretation up to judges. So there are basic rights, and the freedom of speech right, which is in the American Bill of Rights, the freedom of speech right is a right in this country because it's been upheld by the High Court. we have several ways of making law in this country. One is to pass laws through the Parliament, and that's called statute laws. Excuse me, I'm not so fussed about that, but because quite often it's for vested interests, protecting vested interests. Another one is court interpretation. As you probably know, if a court makes an interpretation of the Constitution or interpretation of a law, then that forms another body of law, adjusts the laws slightly. So I don't think, and the right to freedom of speech is enshrined in Australian court system. So I don't think we really need a Bill of Rights. But I don't know the argument against a Bill of Rights well enough. We also have another person in our office who's a recent graduate from the law degree. He favours a Bill of Rights. So there's debate there. So it's not a cut and dried issue, in my opinion. So why don't we have a Bill of Rights? Because I think we've got adequate protections in the legal system. When the government behaves itself, what we've got to work out now is how we can make the government behave itself, because state and federal governments alike went ultra vires. They went beyond their authority under the COVID mismanagement, and they told us lies. So, and now they're protecting themselves by making sure they can get a censorship bill in to censor you and me, but make themselves exempt from censorship. I've only got a minute left, so before our time runs out. So I want to thank everyone who's asked questions, everyone who's listening, everyone who's watching, and we'll see you next week. If you're coming to the conference tomorrow at the Children's Health Defence in Upper Coomera, if you're coming to the One Nation Freedom of Speech conference, if you're coming to the One Nation showing of Sounds of Freedom tonight at Portside in Hamilton, well, I'll see you there. Until next week, thank you very much. Have a safe and happy weekend and a productive week.